that then gets on to the next objection that so the prophecies have not been fulfilled. The objection to this argument from the covenant theologians would be that if you think to the last point, the idea of the spiritual, the promises, they would just say that, well, all the blessings given to Abraham are spiritual, the physical blessings are not literal. They have all been fulfilled by Jesus in the new covenant. So they would say that they could agree with us on the last point, but they'd just say, well, the physical blessings, these are just not literal. Okay, these are spiritual that belong to the church. So therefore, I'd need to prove that the physical blessings have not been done away with by the new covenant. So let's have a look at the new covenant. So Jeremiah 31:31 to 34. Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, and I'll make a new covenant with the house of Israel, with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant I made with their fathers, the day that I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant which they broke, though I was a husband to them, says the Lord. But this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says the Lord. I'll put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, they shall be my people. No more shall every man teach his neighbour, and every man his brother, saying, know the Lord, for they all shall know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, says the Lord. I forgive their iniquity, and their sin I remember no more. So covenant theologians, as we've seen, they substitute the church in the place of the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. So this is linked to the previous argument that was made. However, when we inspect the prophecies relating to Israel, there are some clear reasons why it cannot mean the church. They must mean Israel. And this is because the new covenant, or when it's referenced, it is referenced alongside the restoration of Israel. So these prophecies prophesied the gathering of the Jews back to the land that was promised to them. Remember that we have that promise made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that of the land. And obviously that is therefore made to ethnic Jews. And this is yet to be fulfilled. However, the nation state of Israel, formed in 1948, obviously, this is evidence that this restoration is potentially close. So we get into the idea that obviously the Jews need to be back in their lands, and then it will be the case that they'll turn to Christ then at the very end. Covenant theologians obviously would reject that, but when we talk about the new covenant, that is related to that. So we can see that when we look at Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 1 through 6. So this is looking ahead to the new covenant. This reads, Now it shall come to pass, when all these things come upon you, the blessing and the curse which I have set before you, and you call them to mind among all the nations where the Lord your God drives you. And you return to the Lord your God and obey his voice, according to all that I command you today, you and your children with all your heart, with all your soul. But the Lord your God will bring you back from captivity and have compassion on you and gather you again from all the nations where the Lord your God has scattered you. If any of you are driven out to the farthest parts under heaven, from there the Lord your God will gather you, and from there he will bring you. And the Lord your God will bring you to the land which your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it. He will prosper you and multiply you more than your fathers. The Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your descendants to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, that you may live. So we see here, when we look at this, we see the reference to the scattering in verse 3 and 4. Obviously, the Lord bring you back from captivity, have compassion on you, and gather you again from all the nations where the Lord has scattered you. So obviously, as a bringing back captivity, we have the reference to the scattering, and then bringing them all back. You know, you were driven from the farthest parts to heaven, where the Lord your God will gather you. From there, he will bring you. So the bringing back to the land. We then have in verse 5, then the Lord your God will bring you to the land of your fathers possessed. You shall possess it, and he will prosper you and multiply you more than your fathers. So right after the scattering, we then have a reference to the restoration of Israel after that scattering. And then in Deuteronomy, at the very end of the section we're looking at in verse 6, there's a reference to the new covenant. We have, and the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and your heart of your descendants, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, that you may live. So we see there in Deuteronomy, we see the scattering, we see the bringing back to the land, and then we see the restoration of Israel. We see them all turning back, and we see that new covenant being fulfilled. We also see the same thing in Ezekiel. So when we look at Ezekiel 36, 24 to 30, so again, we see here, so the reference to the scattering and the restoration of Israel. For I will take you from among the nations, gather you out, all countries, and bring you into your own land. So reference to the scattering, restoration of Israel. We then have a reference to the new covenant directly after. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. I will take the heart of stone out of your flesh and give you a new heart. So whenever we have the prophecy of the new covenant, we have that bringing Israel back, the restoration of Israel, and then the new covenant. So obviously the covenant theologians are going to obviously the issue then they have with that is what exactly is the scattering, because it seems like, as we've sort of looked in the verses, that we have part of the new covenant is the restoration of Israel, which obviously they're going to deny. They would argue that obviously the regathering can refer to the return from captivity or the reference to the worldwide church. This argument fails for many reasons. Israel was not dispersed when it was in captivity. So when they were taken to Babylonian captivity, that was not dispersed. They were not dispersed all over the place. They were just in Babylon, are the ones who were in captivity. The worldwide church fathers did not possess the land. So obviously when we looked at Deuteronomy 30, the worldwide church fathers, they're not the ones possessing the land. That is directly linked to ethnic Israel. When we think the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, ethnic Israel, the church can't fit in to that. So obviously Jesus fulfills part of the new covenant, but the new covenant wasn't intended for the church alone. It was intended as a promise for Israel, which again we're partakers of. Remember, when we think back to the last argument, we are partakers of the spiritual promises of Abraham. So that new covenant which is fulfilled, we are just partakers of that. It was initially meant as a restoration of Israel. There are multiple prophecies on the national restoration of Israel, not confined to the new covenant alone. We have Isaiah 29 here. I won't read it, I'll just leave it up there. But yeah, you have Isaiah 29. So again, promises made to Jacob. With Jeremiah 24:7, I'll again give them a heart to know me, that I'm the Lord, and they shall be my people, and they'll be their God, and shall return to me with their whole heart. So again, that restoration of Israel coming back to God. And Jeremiah 50:19 to 20, I bring back Israel to its home, feeding Carmel and Bashan. And you think at the very end it says, the sins of Judah, but they shall not be found, and I'll pardon those whom I preserve it. And when you think of the argument made by the covenant theologians that this is the return from captivity, that doesn't really work, because Israel is not in a current state of being cleansed from iniquity, which is what these verses talk about. This only occurs in the new covenant. So this must be referenced to the new covenant, and this must be about Israel coming back. And one of the really famous ones, I think this is the last one I've got, is from Hosea. You think Romans 9, in the middle section, quotes Hosea, the main part being in the middle of here, where it says, you are not my people, there it shall be said to them, you are sons of the living God. And Hosea is really a prophecy talking about Israel being God's chosen people, and for a partial time losing their protection from God. They still remain God's chosen people. They just lose that protection for a time. And then when it's said, in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, there it shall be said, you are sons of the living God. So again, that restoration of Israel coming back into the fold and coming back under God's provision. And that's what's talked about in Romans 9, but I didn't really have time to get into that. So we can clearly see how Israel will be restored in the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's not a metaphorical promise to the church, but it's a literal restoration. And the state of Israel is massive evidence that this is happening, obviously. it's 3 years after the end of the Holocaust that all the Jews were brought back to that land. That's only going to be developed further.